So this should be a major news story all around the world right now that everyone should be talking about. But of course, it's not, because it debunks a news story that was predicated on lies, disinformation, propaganda to sell you a military conflict that actually led up to Donald Trump bombing another country, going far more beyond than even his predecessor, Barack Drone Obama, which I thought was impossible, but that day is here. And it's even more important to discuss this video in the larger context with, of course, the escalations and aggressive moves being made between the United States and Iran, which many people say we are very close to an actual physical conflict with, or even the chances of that happening with an accident are very high. So this story is extremely important. This story was put together by Caitlin Johnston, and she has the title here: Confirmed Chemical Weapons Assessment Contradicting Official Syria Narrative is Authentic. And she goes on and talks about how the main story that justified Donald Trump bombing Syria, because his daughter came to him and showed him images of Syrian children suffering. And that was the talking points by many White House officials, that this is what led Jared Kushner's wife to manipulate her dad to bomb this country, mainly because of a chemical weapons attack, which, Jason, we have new leaked information, have actually been contradicted by the official organization that was investigating them. This is a crazy story, but lay it out here for everyone in layman's terms before we get into the minutia details of the cylinders and all this other scientific facts behind this.
Yeah, this comes from a leaked report on the Organization for the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons, or supposedly the good guys. You know what I'm saying? They're the good guys trying to get rid of the chemical weapons. And by the way, their report didn't mention this. This was an internal document from one of their reporters revealing what had really happened. That was inconvenient for them, or they didn't believe him for some reason, Luke. And guess what happens? That document leaks. And through an internal document by the OPCW, I just want to go into the quote so everybody can understand that this document is real and indeed did leak. Pursuant to its established policies and practices, the OPCW Technical Secretariat is conducting an internal investigation about the unauthorized release of the document in question. This is why whistleblowers are important. This is what we need. Otherwise, this organization that does such good, Luke, would still be propagating, and is still propagating, by the way, without any challenge, because the mainstream media isn't reporting this, that there was a chemical attack in Douma in April. And Luke, it just happened to take place after Trump started saying it's time to get out of Syria. It's time to get out of Syria. All of a sudden this happens. And even a guy like Mattis, who is promoting this, when confronted by Tulsi Gabbard, if there is any evidence, can't say there's any evidence. And yeah. Luke, we could go through a plethora of evidence that came out right after the fact that suggested it didn't happen at all. But when you look at these pictures and you look at the quotes from that leaked document, it becomes more and more apparent, of course, this was staged.
Yeah, I mean, this is why you don't send whistleblowers to jail. We need whistleblowers to tell the truth, because we wouldn't know a lot of this if it wasn't for someone internally leaking a document that this organization hid and did not want you to see. Now, of course, we were extremely critical of the events that are unfolding. We were espousing our own personal beliefs and opinions, then saying, hey, this is all based on bullcrap. And we were confirmed. If you look at the videos back when we talked about the chemical weapons attack, Trump's attacks, Trump's airstrikes in Syria, extremely, extremely critical, because all the other signs were there. We could get into that in just a little bit, all the circumstantial evidence around this that said, hey, fake, actual fake news promoted, pushed on by the president, censored by these top official organizations. Come on now. Now specifically, this was an assessment signed by the OPCW. They're trained experts. Talk about the cylinders that were used here to disperse these chemical weapons. The official story was that the Syrian government came in there. They were winning the war. They were winning against an Al-Qaeda offshoot. And they said, you know what? We're going to drop chemical weapons now and get the whole international community pissed off at us to justify an intervention, to justify foreign countries coming in, violating the rule of law. That's literally what they tried to get you to think. That's the first thing we were calling out back in the day. But they said that the official cylinders that they were using, that the Syrian government flew overhead through these cylinders and created this chemical weapons attack in an Al-Qaeda allied region that was losing the battle. And that's a whole nother topic here to get into. But they actually looked into these cylinders, and this investigator was like, they weren't dropped from airplanes, they were placed here. No, you can't talk about that. You can't talk about that at all. And again, it just showed you that it contradicts their own report, contradicts the US and the UK statements on this. And again, people at the time, there was Al-Qaeda linked rebels on the ground. They had nothing to lose and everything to gain from, of course, NATO becoming their own private air force. The United States funded many radical Islamic terrorist groups, threw in money, threw in guns with the help of Saudi Arabia and Israel into that region, all based and predicated in their involvement for greater geopolitical goals, not for humanitarian purposes, my buttocks. But again, we saw the narrative, Jason. The narrative is like bloodthirsty, crazy Bashar al-Assad, the monster, gasses his own people. We need to justify a whole slurry of bombs coming into his buttocks. And people bought and sold it in the mainstream media. With still the majority of people saying, hey, there's not a good track record of the truth being told here with Western interventions. But the details that we're getting now, holy cow, it's astronomical, Jason.
Well, I want to remind everybody that, you know, people like Robert Fisk, who have done great journalism, right out of the gates went there, investigated, went to the hospital, did not find any evidence of a chemical attack. Now, Russia actually held a press conference at The Hague because what you're looking at here behind me is this one of the kids that was in the hospital, supposedly a victim of these chemical attacks, and he's fine. And he's sitting next to his dad, and his dad said none of this ever happened. And you know, this video is very much available, Luke.
Yeah, a lot of the kids are like, there's so many of these incidences. They were like, oh, we were just grabbed and had water thrown on us by these weird rebel guys, Al-Qaeda guys, and then they just started filming us and they told us to cry. That's literally some of the testimony we got there. There was even mainstream media journalists that were coming in there and were reporting like, hey, this looks exactly the total opposite of the narrative that we're being sold down there, Jason.
Yeah, and, you know, I want to say this, you know, I'm not a right-winger by any means, but OAN, you know, all these other journalists couldn't get in there, right, Luke? Nobody else could get in there. And somehow
I tried to get in there, Jason.
What's that?
Jason, I tried to get in there. I was literally looking into it, and they were canceling flights. Flights weren't allowed to land in Syria, and I'm like, how the me and my friend were like, let's go. You know, and I couldn't get in there myself.
Well, you know, Pearson got in there. He was on the streets, blocks away, right into the center. Said there was no attack. Forget about like a chemical attack. Nobody injured, and nobody on the street saying anybody was injured. It's insanity. That's never been reported by the media. Instead, remember when they focused on that CNN reporter who later got there and sniffed a backpack up? She said she smelled chlorine. You think I'm making that up, folks? You know, let's look at it together. CNN reporter, Syria.
How lazy and incompetent are these stupid individuals who think that they could just lie to us incredulously? Yeah, I remember the backpack thing. They were like, look, we found the backpack. It stinks. It's proof. We got to bomb them. We got to attack. We got to start a war.
There she is.
Kill more people. Yeah.
Let's see what she has to say, guys.
Stings. And there's definitely something that stings.
Вот тут,
well, that's it. We better start missiles. It's a missile strike time. Guys, I want to remind everybody that we're supposed to be pretty much out of Syria. Remember, the war is now over, yet you still have Ben Stiller propagating for the United Nations and sanctions to bring the white helmets in and give access to the refugees. Listen, that's a complex issue. We did a video on it. I get it. But remember, we're putting those refugees out of homes. We're the ones supporting this warfare on the ground against Assad. We're the ones that went in there with Operation Timber Sycamore back in 2012. It's time to leave. It's time to get uninvolved, and we're only escalating the situation when we declare things like the Golan Heights regions are now Israel's.
Yeah, Jason, because it's all a part of their proxy war building to the bigger conflict with Iran. There's Iranian forces fighting in Syria, backed by the Syrian government, fighting against radicalized Al-Qaeda, ISIS, al-Nusra, and all these other radical Islamist groups there that are financed, supported, armed, and funded by Israel, Saudi Arabia, and of course the United States. This is the kind of larger class of civilizations that I've been talking about. This is the kind of proxy war that has been established there. Another one is happening in Yemen, and now the conflicts are really escalating, where they're just thinking it's going to be a full, all-out, blown-out conflict between Iran and, of course, everyone else. But most importantly, we have to understand this is what they're doing to try to convince you for war, which is something that, of course, they need to lie to you about, because there's no way justifying killing someone else when they're not a threat to you. This is the total level, literally. I'm happy you brought that up. I'm happy you remembered the smelling book bag thing of how just ridiculous they are, Jason. But the bigger point here, keep all of this in mind when you hear information about Iran, number one. And two, the first step of ending the war is not believing in it based off of lies, questioning it, because again, they're doing everything they can to convince you. They know that they need to convince you in order to do this. Don't be convinced by abusive liars who see you as someone that they could just lie to you about for the pure benefit of those few select individuals. It's absolutely crazy, and this should be headline news everywhere. And at least we're talking about it, right, Jason?
Yeah, I guess we're the only ones that are going to be talking about it. Unfortunately, folks, we live in a world where the mainstream media isn't invested in the truth. They're invested in the military-industrial complex and angry cats dying. That's what's trending. No one's talking about this report. No one's talking about Syria in general. Why would they? Iran has basically fallen out of the trending news. We no longer have the anti-war movement that we even had 10 years ago. It's very sick and disturbing, but I know you guys watching this out there are paying attention, and that's why we got to support people like Caitlin Johnstone, who's done a lot of great work recently, and we hope that you support us as well. We're doing 4 videos a day across 2 separate platforms, News for a Change and We Are Change. So make sure you're subscribed, ringing that bell, sharing this stuff on social media, and being the change you want to see in the world.